Magic Sam was a great guitarist and sort of a self-contained guy. He actually could play a storm all by himself without drummers or bass players or any other musician. And yet he called me to play rhythm guitar on a gig. And I was puzzled by that because he doesn't need, if there's anybody who doesn't need a rhythm guitar player, it's Sam.
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 452. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the internationally celebrated and award-winning author and musician, Paul Asbell. Paul.
Nice being here, Barney.
Yes, that was great. And you know what's interesting? We've been talking for 20 minutes, and 10 minutes into the conversation, I didn't hit record, and then I hit record, and we just kept talking more. We didn't even start the interview yet, but now we're into it, Paul. We're into the meat.
Now we're doing it.
Now we're doing it. So Paul, you have an amazing history. So can you remind our listeners? I'm saying remind and not tell our listeners, because I'm sure there's a lot that know of you. Can you remind our listeners about your background?
Well, I was born in Chicago in 1949 and grew up there. And a good deal of the beginnings of my life were there. But at around 11 or 12, my dad, who always had a guitar around the house because as a younger guy, he was a folk singer and kind of spent a lot of time with people like Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, and played and wrote songs that were kind of labor movement songs. He wasn't much of a deep musician, but played enough guitar to be able to accompany himself and play these songs. Anyway, there were guitars always around the house, and at age 11 or so, I kind of caught the bug. And considerably later, maybe when I was about 17, I started going to blues clubs, and it wasn't long after that I was hired to play rhythm guitar for a number of the blues people that had previously been heroes and, kind of, I won't say role models necessarily, but people that I admired greatly. And when I started playing with them and started getting hired and kind of entering the world of music through those blues clubs, sort of put a stamp on my life, and that's kind of where I went.
Okay. Now, so what motivated you to compile your essays into a published book called Stages?
Well, I have to say I never set about to write a book. That was the farthest thing from my mind, but I was often writing little pieces. I guess essays is probably the best word to use. You used it, and I think it's an apt one. Was about various things that were, anecdotes that had happened to me in the past. Often I would kind of see in those anecdotes some larger truth or something like that was part of, that you could easily extrapolate and somebody who wasn't a musician could understand and appreciate. And I would often try to, I won't say a moral, but some larger truth that would be contained within experiences I had. And I started writing stories in that way. And I vividly remember kind of posting them on Facebook over the years. Often I would be perhaps celebrating a birthday of one of the people I had played with who I admired. Sometimes I would be posting about the death of somebody who I admired. Sometimes I'd be talking about a political issue that I was kind of wrestling with myself and trying to see both sides of and stuff like that. And eventually people enjoyed it and were very complimentary of it. And people started saying, so when's the book coming out? And when that came up, I thought, what? That is definitely not what I was picturing myself doing. And I was surprised by it at first, but the chorus kind of continued. And at some point I thought, Paul, maybe they're seeing something that you're destined to do that you aren't. And at some point I kind of said, maybe they're right and I'm wrong, and started thinking about fashioning a book out of a certain number of these essays. And once you put them back to back, there's a lot of tweaking that you have to do to really make it a book. And I asked myself, do I want to do that? And I said yes. So in the last couple of years, I've been spending a lot of time doing that, trying to make an entity out of what otherwise were somewhat, distinct essays.
Now, which essay would you say was the most fun or emotional to revisit?
Oh gosh. Well, I, w- many of the things happened. I was talking about something that happened in my early life, and sometimes I'd bring it within that essay up to the present. But one essay that I specifically wrote, which is in the book, is called "Big Mama Thornton and Her Hound Dog Cadenza." And that relates to a gig that I was hired to do here in Vermont when I moved here, with a woman named Big Mama Thornton, who's a kind of a legendary blues woman. She was the person who first recorded the song Hound Dog, that of course gets associated with Elvis Presley, and that's what everybody would think. It's his song. It's really her song. Any rate, playing with her at Goddard College was one of those countercultural, cross cultural things that it was hysterically funny. It was also kind of what's the right word? It was just a juxtaposition of cultures that was really wacky, and I tried to capture that in my story, and I did it there better than I'm doing here.
Because you've worked with a lot and met with a lot of musical legends, and you've had some good moments. Can you share a memory playing with Muddy Waters or Howling Wolf?
Well, with Muddy Waters, I played with on a record called Fathers and Sons that was conceived to be a way in which Muddy, who was one of the fathers, recorded with, quote, some of his sons, namely Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, who were people I knew and later I worked with. And so the idea was to put the kind of older generation bluesmen with younger and often white blues players and people who had kind of made more a dent in our culture, in part because I think they were white, and in part because young people tend to like younger musicians and watching them on stage more than they do old people, I think. And so Muddy Waters, this was a way of introducing Muddy Waters to a world that knew Paul Butterfield more than Muddy Waters. And anyway, I was asked to play on that record, and I was also asked to play on what sort of a follow-up record that was Howlin' Wolf. It was called the Howlin' Wolf London Sessions, or the London Howlin' Wolf Sessions. And that is one of the ones that I write at length about in my book, because I was asked to overdub some things that basically replaced a part of Eric Clapton's track on that recording. And it's just, I wanted to write it because I thought it would be an insight into the kind of backstage, so to speak, of how recordings actually get made in the world that we live in now, where it's not necessarily everyone in one room and the camera and the tape machine go off and boom, there's your record. It's the first step in a process, and by illustrating that process of that London Howlin' Wolf session, I thought I could kind of get people to see backstage kind of how the sausage is made of recording.
Was there any like funny or surprising stories from the Chicago blues clubs?
Quite a few, actually. And one of them actually was, it's funny, I wrote about another gig that I played with a guy who's, again, another hero named Magic Sam, where Magic Sam was a great guitarist and sort of a self-contained guy. He actually could play a storm all by himself without drummers or bass players or any other musician. and yet he called me to play rhythm guitar on a gig, and I was puzzled by that because he doesn't need. If there's anybody who doesn't need a rhythm guitar player, it's Sam, and I didn't understand it until I was actually on stage doing it, and then when I realized, oh, he really wanted me to open up the show and play 3 or 4 tunes to warm up and then bring up Magic Sam. And it is now, or was shortly thereafter, abundantly clear how that part of the business worked. But it wasn't clear to me at the time. And I don't even know exactly what announcements I made to the audience and whatever, but it was one of those learning experiences where I kind of realized, oh, that's how the world works, and that's how show business works in a way that was not, I didn't realize because I was just a 19-year-old kid at the time. And a lot to learn about kind of the backstage world of music.
Right. And so we're talking about your book, Stages, Ruminations, Rants, and Reminisces on a Life in Music. And how did you get the idea of including a QR link music come about?
Well, I have to tribute my good friend Bill Schubart for that, who is was a former owner of Philo Records, where I recorded many things for. But he had said that originally as a way, because I was mourning the fact that, unfortunately, because as a book, people won't be able to hear the music that I'm talking about, or in the case of that Howlin' Wolf recording, they won't be able to actually hear the point at 2 minutes and 40 seconds where Paul comes in and is playing and clearly is audible over Eric Clapton. And I thought, that is a shame that there's no way to do that, in a book form. And my friend Bill said, well, maybe if you link the QR code to the YouTube recording, maybe that you could do that. And at first I thought, well, that's just too weird. Who does that? And now the answer is, I do that. And I've gotten actually some really good feedback from people who enjoyed being able to go down the rabbit hole of listening to a song while they're actually reading about it. And then from there, sometimes, because we all know what YouTube is like going down the rabbit hole of hearing more things by that artist. And it really made what I wanted to achieve in the book possible, because it becomes an audio visual experience, if you know what I mean.
That's pretty cool. Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. You talk a little bit about in your book, in your memoir, you talk a little bit about your earlier life, but you also are a teacher as well.
It's true. I've pretty much most of my professional life, I've taught guitar, and by extension, teaching music, because teaching guitar is teaching music, often to people who, quote, play guitar but don't know anything about music, which means a lot of guitar players. And most musicians I know, the teaching angle that they do is, or I shouldn't say most, but many of them, it's a necessary evil to be able to afford to be a musician. And for me, it's never really been that. I've always enjoyed the idea of figuring out, what is this person in front of me? What are they missing that will make them be able to kind of reach what it is that they wish they could do, but are clearly missing something, and they may not know what that thing is that they're missing. And finding that, and then being able to kind of go from point A to point B, in a sense, with them in a very personalized way, is something I still find challenging and enjoy.
How has you being a musician changed by being a teacher?
Oh, good point. It does have to do a little bit with what I was saying a minute ago, that most guitarists think of the guitar in terms of, well, this guy showed me this, and you put your finger like that, then you do this thing with your right hand, and then out comes the Led Zeppelin song, or out comes the Doc Watson song, or out comes the Bob Dylan song, or whatever. But the idea that, and they may know the names of chords, they might even know that this is like the scale, the pentatonic scale. They may know some terms that, have to do with music, but very, very often the idea that there's a logic to this thing, that it's a system, that music actually is a system and a language that pianists and guitarists can talk to one another about, or trumpet players, or clarinet players, or orchestra conductors. They're all talking a common language, even though their hands do a totally different thing on their instrument. That's Guitarists are way behind the eight ball in that regard. So I kind of got adept at doing that somewhat early on in the game, because I'm self-taught myself. So I had to figure out kind of, how does this stuff work, meaning music. And therefore I found it, I could relate to the person who did not know that in front of me, even if that person was a good guitar player. And that's the thing that I kind of enjoy most in teaching, is kind of expressing how music works to people who only know how to play guitar but don't get the big picture.
Is there like, when it comes to teaching music, is there a stereotype between percussion, wind, and string players? Like, one is going to be considered a better teacher than over the other?
Well, there, I don't know. I mean, I think somebody who is an adept drummer and could be an extremely good drummer, that person in their instrument never has to deal with the idea of scales, chords, harmony in general. That's just not part of what the instrument is, unless they play xylophone or vibraphone or marimba or something like that. So drummers typically have their own lens into it that's missing a number of components of what we regard music as being. And they're also crazy, I might sort of add. Haha. Kind of little musician joke. But everybody sort of looks at music through the lens of their own instrument. And I have to say that if somebody was looking broad picture at what instrument most gives you a grounding in how music works, as well as being able to play that instrument, I think everyone would agree that the piano is the answer to that, or keyboards.
Okay.
And guitar somewhat less so, and in fact a lot less so. And so therefore I think it is true that there's not too many pianists out there who can play piano well but don't have a clue as to how the music works, or how to express music language to a trumpet player. That is not a characteristic of pianists generally, but it often is of guitarists.
Being a musician, how did that prepare you to be an author?
I didn't know that it did, actually, until well, maybe one way to answer that question is that we all drew straws in one of the bands I played in and play in, the Unknown Blues Band with Big Joe Burrell, although Big Joe is no longer with us. And we felt like we need to do a newsletter to keep people posted on what we're doing. So who's going to do it? Nobody lifted their hand. And so eventually I was sort of the guy that, well, I'll do it, I guess. Let me try it. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed and got satisfaction out of kind of the well-turned phrase and expressing something well. But also, I was surprised by how much I felt the need to tweak it until it was, quote, just right. And I was surprised I did that, because I'm not surprised that I do that in music. I've done that in music all my life. But Paul, why do you care so much about this sentence? I mean, I understand why you care about this solo, but why do you care about this? This isn't your gig, if you know what I mean. And but I did. I clearly took it seriously enough that it just seemed wrong to me until I found that perfect word. And there, that's right. That's what it wanted to be all along. And at some point I started analogizing it to music, because that's what I do with music. It's what most, professional, serious musicians try to do, is to feel like there's a perfect way that this line can read, or this solo can get played, or this song can get written. And if it's 98% there, it just bugs you about the 2% that isn't, until that was exactly what it was missing. I've always felt that about music. And once I discovered that, I guess I feel that way about the printed word or the spoken word too. I realized, I guess maybe I'm doing the same thing with words that I do with music. And then you're lost. then you're then you're a goner. And so, at any rate, I went down that road far enough to realize that this is kind of a beautiful thing.
Right. Now, was there any stories that you wanted to keep in the book that just didn't make the cut?
Well, that's a good question, and I guess the answer is that there were about 50 sort of candidates, that I had written, and some of them were just, Paul, this is just too short. Sorry, and other ones are, this is a little more controversial maybe than you want to take on. A couple of political things that I'd written, which I send you couldn't read the book and not know where I come down on certain issues facing our nation and the world. But on the other hand, somebody once told me, a guy I really respect, said that, there's a number of these essays, Paul, that nobody but you could have written. And I mean that in a good way, because they're so personal to you. And one or two of these pieces, they're really good, but other people could have written them. They're, not unlike what you see in, I don't know, the New York Times current events section, or an op-ed piece or something. And he said, they're good, but they're not as uniquely you as these other things are. So maybe it's not so much that you should take that out because it's controversial, but you just may not want to. You may want to make this more highly personalized. And actually, that won the argument, so to speak, at some point. So I did remove one or two things that were sort of more political and sort of exploratory, for that reason. But I still have stuff in the can, so to speak, for, that, who knows, maybe if I want to be another 5 years of masochism, I might do another one.
And also, too, was there any photos that didn't make the cut that you kind of wanted to keep in?
Yeah, I would like to have had even more photos. There was a lot, as you know, because you saw the book. There's a lot of kind of archival photos that, for me, are a big part of it, because there's a lot of people who, for example, like, you're writing about Magic Sam, Paul, and I've heard his name, but like, what's he look like? Why put me in the picture, so to speak? Give me, if you can't bring me to the blues club and make me sort of see the guy on stage, at least, put in some pictures that tell 1,000 words, like that expression. And I really wanted to do that. And one thing I realized, because you have to pay photo licensing for a lot of these pictures, if you want to do it right and not get sued, and also do the ethical thing. And there was just not enough in the budget to do as many photos as I otherwise would have liked to. So, yeah.
And so how do you present the book too? It's like, have you done, book readings and things with that?
Yeah, I'm starting to do a number of those book readings. In fact, one of the things that, as we're talking about here, that I wish I could do is sort of present the whole thing in a very multimedia fashion, where you sort of hear the music, as we're talking about, and you also sort of read the words, but also see photos, or in many cases illustrations, that kind of put you in the picture. I wanted to do that, and then realized, I could do presentations of this book that would have all of those things. I could make sort of a PowerPoint type video that, or using presentation software that has continuous photos kind of behind me, and then at certain points could actually play the song or the snippet that I'm talking about. And so now that's what my presentations are. And at this point, the idea of sitting down in a bookstore, as I guess most authors do, and just kind of, show up in your corduroy jacket like an author and smoke your pipe and read your book, seems like, God, that's so limited. Why wouldn't you want to present a bigger image of that? So that's what I find myself doing now.
Okay. And what legacy do you hope Stages creates for, say, like American roots music?
Well, I'm not going to flatter myself into thinking that, the world does not need another person kind of talking about, American roots music and creating interest in it, because I think the world in many respects has discovered it, thank God. But I do think that there are certain artists that I have played with where I think looking at them from a more personal angle, and particularly sort of seeing how they've affected my life, I try to make it a very, very general thing that I'm talking about. It's not just like an anecdote for me. It's sort of a way of looking at the world through the lens of an experience that you have, and also growing up in a, through having those experiences. That's what I feel I've done, and it's what I try to get across in the book.
Okay. Now, so Paul, what advice would you give musicians who are thinking about writing their own memoirs?
Don't do it. You're going to put a lot, you're going to put a lot of time into doing this enterprise. And one of the things that at least I certainly did, and it does kind of split your time a little bit. On the other hand, I feel like striving for the perfect expression of something in words is really analogous to the musical skill set. And if you try to do that with words, I bet you'll do it a little bit better in your music, whether it be writing songs or whether it be playing a solo, someplace. Kind of that idea of it's not necessarily that the more words, the better. That, the 1,000-page book is not necessarily better than a 100-page book, but trying to crystallize an idea into saying it perfectly in just the right amount of words, just no more, no less, perfectly chosen. That's a musical lesson as well as a writing lesson. And I think it can make you a better musician if you attempt to do that.
So Paul, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where is the best place they could go to?
Well, one of the things they could do, and I encourage people to do so, and I'm having a little bit of trouble with my website right now, but it is www.paulasbell.com, PAULASBELL.com. And there's kind of there's probably way too much content on it, talking about the 4 CDs I have, what guitars I played on this song on that CD, where this song comes from, how I first learned it. Thank you. What I'm trying to do, with my music in that regard. And there's just a bunch of stuff on there. It's a info, filled website. I've been chided for that a number of times. Oh, there's all of the reviews and stuff, anything you'd probably want to know about my career is there somewhere. But what I'd also like it to be is I'm always tipping my hat to the people that inspired me, and hopefully that comes across in the website as well.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So Paul, you'll have to come back on when you write your next memoir too. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Might not be for a couple of months. Just kidding. It'll be a while, but I really appreciate your having me, Barney. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.